like 603,
603.
604.
Okay.
So we're going to admit everybody so they can see us. Welcome everyone to our first Literary Thursday event of 2026. We're so happy to have you. We're going to start in a few minutes at around 603. In the meantime, you're welcome to put in the chat where you're watching us from, what location, whether in Queens or New York or America or in the world. You're welcome to put it in the chat.
And also, Happy New Year to everyone. Wishing you a
Yes.
bright and wonderful new year. And thank you again for joining us tonight on Literary Thursdays. So we would love to hear where you're coming from, where you're going to be watching us from, what part of the United States, what part of the world. Feel free to put it in the chat.
Okay, so we have Central New York, Jamaica, Queens, New York City, oh, Stanford, California, Far Rockaway. Nice. Cambria Heights. Hollis Hills,
Hollis Hills,
Queens.
Queens.
Nice. Yeah, we have a very good turnout. Very nice. Manhattan.
Mm. Hey, Jamaica, Queens.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of people. That's good. So Simone, do you think should we start?
Yeah, so we should.
Okay, so it is 6:03. So welcome everyone. So happy to see you in 2026. This is our first Literary Thursday of the year. We're so excited. Join us at Queens Public Library as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We will be offering programs for all ages in tribute to Dr. King, including this one tonight that you're attending, and recommendations for books and films that celebrate his extraordinary life and legacy. Learn more on our website at queenslibrary.org. This January, we're celebrating space exploration. Join us during the week of January 26th for space-themed science and art programs for kids, fascinating NASA presentations, and much more. Visit queenslibrary.org to get all the details about Space Week at Queens Public Library. And finally, our last announcement, it's time for a healthy start to your new year. Regardless of your age or fitness level, developing and maintaining healthy habits begins with mind, body, and community. Join us for a great variety of health and wellness classes for kids, teens, adults, and older adults at our locations all across Queens. For more information, visit queenslibrary.org. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Simone.
Hello, good night, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again. And Happy New Year to those that I didn't say. Happy New Year too. We are starting off today with this wonderful interview with Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall, who is an Emmy Award-winning writer and legal commentator. She has litigated cases for the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, the Southern Poverty Law, and Community Legal Services. Her previous works include She Took Justice, The Black Woman Law, and Power and the Voting Rights War. A frequent commentator on CNN, NPR, and MSNBC, Brown Marshall has received numerous accolades, including the 2024 American Bar Association Silver Gavel Award. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Brown Marshall. So take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I thank one and all who have put this together. And believe it or not, it may seem a simple feat, but it takes a lot of people to do this. And Queens Public Library is a wonderful place. I know we can do so much with books online and all the other things that we can do without leaving our homes. But if you have a chance to go to Queens Library, you really should. Queens Public Library is an entity world class, and the people there are also world class. I'm here to talk about my book, A Protest History of the United States, and it's published by Beacon Press. And Beacon Press is located in Boston, and it's been publishing books for over 150 years. And they publish books that sometimes other publishers may not see the light or may not see the purpose or whatever it may be. This book is an interdisciplinary book. And so I'm so proud of it, and I'm proud of Beacon for supporting it. And it's part of the Revisiting the United States history. And it's a series of books that look at U.S. history from a different perspective. And this perspective is interdisciplinary, which means I do look at history in primary sources, the National Archives, other archives, libraries, visiting sites around the country. But I also include interviews with activists whom you may know and others you don't. I also have included legal cases as well as memoir. Initially, when I was going to write this book, it was for the purpose of threefold purposes, I'll say. One is because I was told by a dear friend about someone who was an activist in Brooklyn who had worked for many decades in community organizing. And she passed away without enough money for a casket or a headstone. And I thought, she gave all she had. And when she gave it, she didn't have life insurance for being a community organizer. Community organizer doesn't have days off in which you have like paid personal leave. You don't have vacation time. You don't have any of those things. You're giving from the heart. You're giving from the soul, and then you're benefiting others. And then I started hearing people say, oh, organizing doesn't work, protest doesn't work. And I was thinking, this woman gave everything she had, and yet there are those who are saying protest doesn't work, it's no longer effective, it was something from the 20th century. And then I thought, what about the young people? What about the people who need the tools and need to have history show them how protest has been effective? But when you look at protests, especially this book, which covers over 500 years, I had to be selective about the protests, the protesters, and the different methods, what I was going to say. And it was a very difficult task, and it took me many years to work on. But in the end, what I have here is a book that I hope will empower, will inform, and will inspire you to know that protest is broader than protests in the streets, that people can protest in all different types of ways. And that's what they had to do in order for us to be here today. To have this time right now, for us to be here today, required that people protest. It's not just a matter of law. Law is one thing, is be on the books. Lots of things are written on the books. We have freedom of speech based on 1791 in the Bill of Rights, but we knew we had to fight for freedom of speech, and that fighting is the protest in its various forms. And so I'll begin with the next 10 minutes, I think they allotted me to read excerpts, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I'll begin with the introduction, and it's 8 chapters, starting with Indigenous, as in the protests of the Indigenous who are then fighting in their own different ways to protest the incursion of Europeans on in North America, and slave uprisings as protest as well as speeches like that of Frederick Douglass. Wet to the Slave is the 4th of July, is a protest speech. We go to women's rights and women's movements and autonomy of a woman's body, and the fact that a woman's womb has been something that's of a battleground, and women protesting for control over their own bodies. Anti-war protests, as well as labor unions. Joining a union is protest. You didn't just get an 8-hour workday. People had to protest to get that 8-hour workday that we take for granted, that 40-hour work week. Don't you see that an employer is not going to just say, well, instead of working 20 hours, why don't you only work 8? Why should they give up their profits? They didn't willingly do so. Santa Claus didn't give us these rights. And so I want people to remember when we get to protesting violent policing and protests around climate change. And there's so many ways in which we live every day with the benefit of protest. And I'll begin. The United States of America was conceived by gunfire and born in rebellion. It was a breech birth, fraught with near-death labor pains and lasting scars. Brought into the new world was a fatherless child, fed on conflicted dreams of commerce and liberty, whose mass grew faster than its mind. The United States of America has maintained a dual personality, writing of freedom and a Declaration of Independence with one hand, lashing the backs of enslaved people with the other, and all the while on stolen indigenous land. These deep and abiding contradictions have marked the country's laws and traditions, which offer the hope of inclusion and opportunity if one only works hard enough. At the same time, the country kills dreams with obstacles of discrimination, classism, and violence that are intentionally placed along the path, making protest a natural response. That's how I begin, and I like to then read from different sections of the book. There is a great deal of good in the United States, and most of it came by way of protest. Notably, the word protest is not in the U.S. Constitution. Instead, our practice of it comes from a combination of guaranteed rights regarding free speech, freedom of assembly, and the petitioning of the government for redress of grievances. Protesters prodded this nation toward enlightened humanity by placing their bodies on the line. Often the response to shining a light on injustice has been terminations from one's job, divide and conquer tactics, and unrestrained brutality. This book will provide examples of abuse resulting from challenges to power in a nation that boasts about her ability and liberty to the rest of the world. Protest will be explored expansively and beyond traditional definitions. Therefore, an interdisciplinary approach is used in telling this protest story, going beyond macro historical methods to include biography, memoir, and interviews. Protest history includes nonviolent and violent rebellions, sit-ins and uprisings, marches and slave revolts, big and small acts of defiance. Protests in this book are nonviolent prayer vigils as well as acts of self-defense. This protest history involves the curious cycle of repression in which those who are once oppressed then protest, oppressed protest, then oppress, work their way up and then attack another vulnerable group or racial minority. The oppressed climb the ladder only to oppress others. Some believe that second-class membership in white American circles is earned by subjugating people of color. White women exclude women of color. Some indigenous tribes look down on other tribes and exclude mixed race Blacks from tribal membership, while colorism besets Latino, Asian, African American, and South Asian communities. The city folk in office buildings look down on the farmers and factory workers, ignoring their plight until a protest stops the supply of food and products needed for the city to run. It is impossible to include the thousands of uprisings and rebellions that have taken place in this country. Although the United States prides itself on a society that embraces freedom, this country has treated protesters with disdain. When the poor protest economic fairness, some wealthy respond by citing Matthew 26:11, the poor will always be with us. However, that does not mean the poor deserve low wages or their suffering should be ignored. As the income gap widens between upper classes and the struggling class, tensions rise too. Parents will not allow their children to go hungry. Throughout time, they have taken to the streets demanding better jobs, higher pay, safer working conditions. Attempts to form a labor union are often seen or met with full-scale layoffs, low-wage replacement workers, bloodshed, eviction, and employer-led violence backed by federal troops, police, and passage of anti-union laws. From a silent march in New York City in 1917 against lynching and mob attacks against unpaid workers to college sit-ins for civil rights and boycotts for picketing and traffic blockades, those protesting injustice have had to rely on diverse strategies and tactics. Also, racial prejudice has not been limited to African Americans. Attacks on Asians in America began over 150 years ago. In San Francisco, California, Tacoma, Washington, whites brutally attacked Chinese workers intent on purging them from the state. But resistance and refusal to comply with American hypocrisy sometimes has led to murder as punishment for breaking the unstated rules of white supremacy. When indigenous peoples of North America protested the original European settlers and their descendants about taking, renaming, and distributing their native land, it spurred a government-led propaganda campaign. Native people who fought for their own land used negotiation, treaties, combat in the courts, using all forms of resistance. But newspapers, radio, television, and movies depicted the indigenous, who were in their right to defend themselves, as the attackers. The white settlers and militia were portrayed as innocent defenders of their homesteads. The U.S. cavalry massacres of Native peoples were categorized as heroic acts of bravery in a one-sided narrative. Protests can be finely orchestrated civil unrest, as well as the very simple feat of staying alive while facing genocidal forces. Militia groups and military regimes working as tools of the presidency, the Congress, the U.S. Supreme Court, and wanton constituents descended upon Native peoples, seeking their annihilation and the conquest of their lands. But the indigenous held on to life and resisted these forces of destruction. For groups under constant assault, like Native Americans, African Americans, the working class, and women, to continue to love, to resist, to maintain a cultural heritage, and carve out a life are all acts of protest. To live under siege and still thrive and find joy, despite the oppressive and unnatural conditions of this country, is an immeasurable victory. It's protest. I want to turn to another section that deals more with memoir, because I actually use memoir in this book and talk about my family's history, starting with my great-great-grandmother, Eliza. And I'm in chapter 2. There was nothing unusual about 7-year-old Eliza, an enslaved girl born in Mercer County, Kentucky, about 1827. In need of a quick influx of money to pay off a $1,000 debt, Eliza's owner, J.A. Lewis, sold her to Thomas and Harriet Christian, a couple looking for a house slave. Eliza was my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. Maddie Letha Bradshaw, her granddaughter, wrote an account of Eliza in a 1907 student essay when Eliza was still alive and Maddie, a graduate of Topeka High School, was studying to be a teacher at Kansas Normal School. Maddie's essay titled My Grandmother's Story was published in the October 18th, 1907 edition of the school paper of the Kansas State Normal School, now Emporia State University. Dr. Sam Dix, a history professor at Emporia State University, found Maddie's article about Eliza decades later and researched the story as a descendant of the Exoduster movement in Eliza Bradshaw, an Exoduster grandmother. Maddie's essay of 1907 was written as a protest of this country's heinous past, but she shared Eliza's humanity, an act of defiance, as protest as well. I want to tell you about Eliza because you may have people in your family, you probably do, who have protested in their own silent ways, protested in ways that are individual without a crowd, or maybe they have protested in crowds, but either way, they did something that was remarkable. Many of them have, like my great-great-grandmother Eliza, done things that allow them to exist today, for you to exist today, and for them to exist in your hearts, and for you to exist today. So I think it's very important to remember our ancestors and the contributions that they made. And I want to tell you about Eliza's act of resistance that's in the book, along with so many other people and protesters and cases and things that have taken place that remind us that these days that seem quite harsh, terrible, unconstitutional, and in some ways very frightening. If we think about our ancestors and realize they faced more with less, but they had a vision, and Eliza's vision was one of freedom. Eliza, in addition to being a mother herself, was forced to be Harriet's seamstress, cook, laundress, housekeeper, gardener, dishwasher, and a wet nurse to Harriet and Thomas's children, laboring from sunrise to sunset at any task that the mercurial Harriet gave her. One day, Eliza, exhausted by endless demands, sat down to rest for a moment, only to find Harriet immediately pick up a thick wooden broomstick handle and strike Eliza, beating her until blood oozed down her face, after which this sadistic woman poured salt into those wounds, demanding that Thomas Christian beat Eliza with a rawhide whip after dinner. A rawhide whip is made of cowhide, but was not used on animals, only inmates and the enslaved, and it cut through skin and muscle. Many enslavers kept a rawhide whip above the kitchen door as an ever-present warning. After dinner, Thomas Christian raised his whip, with Harriet Christian looking on greedily. Eliza responded by throwing a pot of scalding hot water that, along with her rage, had been boiling over a large fire. The Christians screamed, cursed, and called Eliza crazy, but the incident convinced them to leave her alone. From that point until she gained her freedom at 59 years old, she was never beaten again. She and her husband, Lewis, chose the last name Bradshaw. After a life of bondage, dreaming of a future can be considered protest. However, when African Americans sought to peaceably begin anew as citizens with constitutional freedoms, white terrorism by night and segregation by day was intent on keeping them enslaved. Night riders torching the community's newly built school for African American children and threatening murder led Eliza and Lewis to join others immigrating north by train and then horse-drawn wagon, leaving Kentucky forever for the plains of Kansas. The Bradshaws became exodusters, the first large-scale migration of African Americans, and named in homage to the biblical book of the Exodus. Exodusters, and leaving one's home for a better life somewhere else is protest as well. I want to stop there and open up for questions, and thank you so much in advance for being here tonight.
Wow. Wow. That is, I think I'm lost for words, Gloria. Whew, yes. I never knew or understood the concept of protest, just basically what I've seen on television. But hearing you give definition has opened my eyes, and it's very, very interesting information. And I'm happy that you're here today to delve into it. But first, I should go to the audience, obviously. And we have the first question coming from Qasim. As a civil rights scholar, can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between law and protest? That's the first question. Second, what does the US Constitution or case law say about citizens' right to protest? Thank you.
Well, thank you. The relationship between law and protest is actually a very creative one. It seems that we have laws, as you know, I've stated, we have laws under the Constitution, and those are probably the most clear ones, because we know we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of assembly, freedom of press. But then when you have the government or people who are citizens and bands together, or people who are wealthy decide that you should not have those rights, that certain people shouldn't have those rights. We know we have the right to vote if we're a citizen, but there have been laws passed to prevent, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, to prevent people from having the citizenship that would allow them the right to vote. We have, of course, citizenship rights that are not, for many, many years, recognized by others for people of color in this country. And so the right to protest, we can see, if we go back, I'm going to do this very quickly. Our Constitution was drafted in 1787 and it was ratified in 1789. Right is ratified in 1791. In order to get what we have now as a constitution, before that we had the Articles of Confederation, where each state has its own right to have its own money, it had its own laws, it had its own right to have treaties with other countries. But you know, it could not keep itself financed. The central government had very little money. It could not protect the other states. And so that's why in 1787, there was this meeting in Philadelphia. They scrapped the Articles of Confederation, decided that we're going to have this central government, and that the central government would have more power than the states. So you have a US Constitution, and you have state constitutions, and then you have cities that have charters. So you have all these laws, and the laws were there for mostly the structure of government. James Madison in 1791 said, if you ratify this federal government, the structure that we want, that will protect the whole country, we will have people with protections against their own government. They feared the government then. And that's why what's happening now was very similar to what James Madison was fearful of, that there would be this charismatic president and we would have a government that would act like a king. And so it gave to the people the right to protest against its own government. And that's what the First Amendment is. So the law says that we have the right to protest, but the word protest is not in the Constitution. We gain these protest rights from freedom of speech, freedom of peaceable assembly. But the last line of the First Amendment says we have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, which means we have the right to petition. Petition is to ask the government for a redress. A redress is to fix our grievances, and we know a grievance is a complaint. So we have the last line of the First Amendment, the right to ask our government to fix our complaints. So then we have, over time, pushback. We protest as people, the government pushes back, lawsuits are made. You can have protest lawsuits that help us define, well, what does it mean to have the right of assembly? What does it mean to have the right of free speech or a free press? So we have lawsuits that also help define what protest rights are. And sometimes when we're in an act of war, they'll say, well, you can't protest as much for, for the common good, the sake of the government. But people will say, well, what about anti-war protesters? We have a right to state how we protest and when we can protest. And so there's always this push back and forth. I think that when you hear today about illegal protests, they're not defining what an illegal protest is. The courts have actually said just because people have a different political opinion, that is not the reason to trigger the National Guard to be in that city. So that already went to the U.S. Supreme Court. So from the time period of 1791 up to this point, there's this push and pull back and forth where protests can take place. What is something, for example, where people protest knowing they're breaking the law, knowing they're going to be arrested. And so you can have those types of protests as well. So it's an ongoing fluid thing, but right now you do have the right to protest. We cannot protest on many public properties. We cannot protest on private properties. We can't destroy other people's property, but we can also stand on public land and let our feelings be known. And that's the most evident protest, but there are many other, as I said, ways that large and small that we can still protest. We can protest economically, be selective in our buying, where we're going to spend our money. So there are many ways in which we can protest, but those are the ones that speaks to the law and protest the best.
Thank you so much. And there is a question from Kira in the chat, so I'll read it out loud. Kira asks, there are people who view protests as inherently unsafe, that social justice movements use young minds to achieve their own ends. How does one change their mind?
Well, usually it's when somebody has skin in the game. Protests when they, for example, George Floyd, so many people protested because they could obviously see what was done was horrible. And they had a feeling inside that said, I have to say something. I have to do something. I have to let my voice be heard. And that voice could be heard in where they stood. Some people would go to the place and say, I just have to stand in solidarity with others. Other people may wear a t-shirt, but there's some point they have to have a sense that this is affecting me too, even if it's not just me, even if it's not at my doorstep, but usually it's in that person's backyard. And when people talk about NIMBA not in my backyard, and I put the other way when it comes to protests, when it is in your backyard, that's when you see people moving toward protests. I think it's important for our young people to understand that what they have was not given to them by Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, that generations, probably people within their own family, had to make strong choices. And in making those strong choices, that was an act of protest that they're benefiting from, and that their price for being here is to invest in their community by standing up for things that are part of their values and belief systems, and also thinking about future generations the same way other people never even knew who they were, invested to have them have benefits of protest. And I think we're just going to have to be a little more selfless when it comes to what we gain every day from people who have protested on our behalf, who never knew us, but they decided they wanted a community that was better. Like that woman in Brooklyn, I didn't know her, but she did things for Brooklyn. Maybe no one might know what she's ever done. She may not ever get a plaque. She's gone on now, but she invested in people, and she invested, if that young person lives in Brooklyn, she invested in ways that help perhaps the school, the community, policing. Many things were probably done on a young person's behalf they don't know anything about. So if they knew more about their history, but also knew more about where their protections come from. And many people just wake up and think that the country just gave them these things without realizing that regular people, just like the people who are here today, and their ancestors and others actually put something on the line in order to make our freedoms happen.
So we have another question coming from Margarita. And Margarita says, how does your research and reflection on history of protest shape your views of what is happening right now in the U.S.?
As I said, James Madison, who is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution, I always say he's the father. I don't know who the mother was, but that's another story. But James Madison is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution. And when the U.S. Constitution was drafted, it was drafted in secret in Philadelphia. So they look at it as a framed document, meaning that people all contributed. He, in speaking in his through his letters and what's been said about James Madison, that the people themselves feared the nation they had created. And that's why we have these three branches of government, to divide up the powers so it wouldn't fall under one person. That's why we have our judicial branch that's separate and have, it has lifetimes appointments, where we have, the Congress, where, the upper level, which is the Senate, has longer appointment time than the people's house, which is the House of Representatives, and that there are limits on presidential power. All of these limits were put in place as a safeguard to the people. But that First Amendment then is what James Madison is telling the people: in case this government gets out of control, you, the people, have to put it back in check. If those three branches, the division of them fails, then it comes down to the people. That's exactly what we have right now. The three branches of government have melded together within this administration, in which there's more power given to the presidency than has been seen in many lifetimes. And so with the capitulation of the Republican Party, and whether or not it's the Democratic Party or whichever party that's in charge of Congress, in this case, it's the Republican Party, that capitulates its power and gives it to the president to command, has now melded two branches together that were supposed to be separate. Then you have a Supreme Court where you have a 6-member conservative supermajority that is seen, as 3 of them, as having been vetted based on their loyalty to the president. So the idea again is you have the third branch now melded under this charismatic leader. So that's what James Madison feared, but the safety net for that is the people. And that's when the people then must go forward to protest. One of my major concerns, to add to this, is that one of the first things that happened in this administration was the undermining of our law firms, especially the major law firms, because the law firms that would be the group that would bring the legal cases to push back against this administration. And these law firms signed on to be tools of the presidency. So that makes it even more important that the people then see their clear role that they've been given under the Constitution to actually use the different ways of protest to push back against the government and to push back against voter suppression, because that's the other mechanism that can be used to undermine a protest vote, because people can vote and use that vote as protest. But if there's voter suppression, then that act of protest is being taken away. So I think it's going to be up to the people to be the fail-safe for what's going on today. But I don't think what's going on today was completely unknown to the framers of the Constitution.
Thank you. And we have a question from Diana, who writes, looking at the murder that just occurred in Minnesota, what do you see as the most effective form of protest would be?
As I stated, I think it's great that people are protesting. I think that just like with George Floyd, there's a need for this administration to see the number of people who are outraged. That's important. And unfortunately, the protesting has been so sporadic this year. We've had the No Kings protest and people come out to, be a part of a rally, but we're not seeing the constant protests that are needed to make social change. And what our forebears did, they had strategic protests. So we need protests that are going to be a part of what, I guess, strategically, economic protests. We have protests that have to be based on the number and placement. We have to also not protest at night. And I say this all the time. It's dangerous because we have no accountability or very limited accountability when it comes to some of these policing agencies that have been let loose on the general public because of the intimidation of this administration. But this country has always killed its own. It's always been very brutal to protesters. And that's why large groups of protesters will fare better than the smaller groups. So I think we need to have thousands of people protesting, that the protests need to be ongoing, and there also need to be economic protests. We need to think about what type of sit-ins, meaning those groups that are supportive of this administration and therefore supportive of what this administration is doing when it comes to allowing the reckless murder of people and then to lie about what happened. We need to have lawsuits. We need to have protests that actually call out the administration in all of the different states and not just in Minnesota. Unfortunately, the other side has been very methodical in undermining what we normally would do in our protests. And so I think that we're going to have to be very creative. Protesters must be creative. I would say, why not protest the Super Bowl? Why not have a protest that disrupts? And that's what protest has to do. It has to do something disruptive. And if people are in a position in which they fear the government, then from the safety of your own home, how can you make your protests known? There are some people who have not shopped at certain stores since February. You know, there are ways in which you can protest from your home to show your displeasure with this administration and find ways. There's a billboard. There's somebody who has enough money for a billboard to actually state, that the displeasure in their own words with this administration, that this woman's life was taken in that way. So artists can create, rappers can create, painters, dancers, we need to figure out ways to be creative in our protests, and we can do it safely. But even if you think that being safe in some way in protesting is going to protect you, just know that, and this is what carries me forward, Breonna Taylor was safely in her home and asleep. She was not a part of any protest at all, and yet here she is gone. So thinking that your silence will protect you is not going to be a protection in this country, the way things are going.
Thank you. And somebody put a long comment in the chat, but I guess it's from Jackie, but I'll just summarize it. Jackie writes, I am so tired of seeing posts on Facebook that say that the US is a republic, not a democracy. So what would you say about that?
I'm not quite sure how that fits with protests, but it is a republic. It's got the political form is a democracy. So a democracy is when you have a representative form of government that you vote on. Having a representative form of government is a republic. But voting for those representatives is democracy. If you want to look at it, kind of a shortcut. That's just a shortcut. But I'm not quite sure how that fits with protests, though, in our conversation.
So Casper, to touch on Diana's questions, there were other questions that followed. She also asked, how do we get everyone on the same specific page to achieve a successful goal? All these different focuses at protests are not effective overall. Would you say this is a prime opportunity to get change in this administration's actions?
I would say that it's rare that everybody is going to be in lockstep, and that's what this administration is requiring. You don't want to be this administration. He's forcing the Republican Party, he did, and they didn't take a whole lot, to get them to go in lockstep. That's not going to be a big tent party, which is the Democratic Party or the progressives, the liberals, whatever you might want to call it, because people aren't all liberal, they're not all conservative when it comes to a big tent thinking. So you could be quite liberal about one thing, but be conservative about something else. So you can't all be on the same page, but you can have basic values and try to find the commonality of those values. And so when you're looking at the commonality of values, you could say, for example, I strong belief, and I'll put it this way. I look at these four. I believe in a democracy. I believe in a democracy. So you look at that as a value. I believe in health. I believe in literacy. I believe in diversity. Those things are part of my core values. And so if you're in another group and your major issue is something else, do you still share those four core values? And so therefore, even though we may not have the same initial reason to enter the protest, we can join forces. And I always like to say, and this is an informal way of putting it, joining forces with different groups is not a marriage, it's a hookup. Okay, if that makes it easier to think about. So many people think that we have to be married forever. No, you're coming together based on a commonality of interests. And one of the things that unfortunately has been happening is the division within the so-called progressive communities is allowed divide and conquer to be easily done. And divide and conquer is an excellent tactic. It's worked for millennia. So the Romans played divide and conquer. Europeans played divide and conquer. And it's always worked until you hit solidarity. And that's the weapon against divide and conquer, is solidarity. And so if we can think of our core values and the different groups can come together with those core values, not saying that we have to have all our minds on the same page and the same issues, then strategically, that's how we change minds. Here's the second part. And so this goes back to the question that was asked before as well. In order to have an effective protest, it's not just the protesters. No, the strategy is to change the minds of people who are not at the protest. The people at the protest are already moving in a particular direction, but they need supporters outside the protest. So women's issues, that means that we need men on our side as well. When we think about issues regarding people of color, that means we need white folks on our side as well. When you think about any group that you're in, you're going to need people outside of that group. And too often, what I'm seeing are rallies where everybody is like joining hands, doing the, getting to know each other. And that's great. That's fine. Once you get to know each other, now, what are you going to do next? What's the push forward? What's the goal? So we need to give more credit to the protesters of the past. They had strategic goals in mind when they went out to protest. And that way, if you've met your goal, what are you trying to change? Then you have to go out more than once. I mean, if you think about it, you want to eat, you only go to the store one time? I don't think so. So if you want to make a change, that means you have to make the change more than one time. You have to keep pushing again and again with other people, making your protest larger and thinking, how can I change the minds of others to agree with me and then join in their own way in my protest? I'll give this last example. We take for granted that the voting age is 18. The voting age was not 18 for much of this country's history. It was 21 and men. So in order for the voting to be women and 18, that meant, as I said before, men controlled Congress. They had to vote for the 19th Amendment in order for women to gain the right to vote. How is it that we changed the Constitution for the voting age to be 18? That meant people who were 21 had to vote for people to vote at 18. The 18-year-olds couldn't vote for it. So when you think about bringing in other people, what is your messaging? What message? And I don't mean paragraph size messaging. I like to say messaging the size of a tattoo. How can you get to the point with George Floyd? I can't breathe. During the civil rights movement, I am a man. Simple, straightforward, to the heart of it. And so that message then can go to other people so that they can join forces with you, whether or not physically at the protest in the street, but someplace else. Protests have to be financed. The money people are not going to be the people in the street. They're going to be the people writing checks outside. So you have to be able to think beyond the rage that got you in the street to the people strategically who can push forward the goal once that's decided that you're trying to achieve.
Thank you so much. So I know that on July 4th, 2026, right, we'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So do you have any special thoughts on that? What should we remember
Thank you
about this?
so much. And the 250 years of protest is how I am looking at this. I'm looking at it as justice and democracy, and that's what my speaking engagements are, as this is part of this. Justice and democracy, 250 years of protest, because the Declaration of Independence is a protest document, as I stated earlier. And so I think that one of the projects I'm working on, for those who are interested, I am looking at, this is the first time I'm saying this in public, July 5th, Martyrs Day. Martyrs Day. Because so many people, known and unknown, have been giving their lives and livelihoods, sacrificing over 250 years for us to have the rights, for the people to have the protections, for us to move forward, for us to be on this webinar right now. They should be recognized. And so I think on July 5th, we should have Martyrs Day, because so many people gave of themselves and for us to have what we have in this anniversary. So I am putting forward for those people who want to join with me to, in all of their different ways, wherever they may be, to form Martyrs Day. And you have your own Martyrs Day program. I'll work with the library and maybe we can do a Martyrs Day event that leads up to it. But I think July 5th. And why July 5th? Because remember, Frederick Douglass's famous speech that he gave on July 5th, what to the slave is the 4th of July? So you start thinking about what is your 4th of July to those people whose rights have been denied. And this 4th of July is here, and we can gain from it because of the people who gave of themselves. So I think the 5th of July would be a great day for Martyrs Day. And I also think this 250th anniversary, unfortunately, is marking one of the lowest points in this nation's history. If it continues the way we're continuing right now when it comes to this constitutional crisis. And I think it's something that we have to look at with the goal of making sure we have read the Declaration of Independence. Most people haven't read it. Few people read the Constitution. Even fewer read the Declaration of Independence. And if you do, it's not the document you think it is. It's not the document people herald as this wonderful document of liberty. It's actually quite toe curling. So read the Declaration of Independence is basically a legal argument made by the states against King George, telling King George why we need to leave. And it's, most of it is based on economics and money and Native Americans. So, read the Declaration of Independence so you'll know what we're commemorating. I would say that people should actually have a couple of reading groups in which they come together and read the Declaration of Independence and know what's inside the document.
So when writing this book, would you consider it as your own form of protest, a literary protest? Like, what were your thoughts in writing it? Because you're basically giving guidelines and a history into protest. So how would you look at it?
I did initially write this book I thought I was writing a legal argument for protest. My way of, pushing back the people who said protest was no longer effective, is old fashioned. It was good for the civil rights movement, women's movement, those things back in the 20th century, but it didn't work in the 21st century. So I was going to initially make a legal argument for protest. That's how the book began. And and then I started to see that so many people were involved in protests, and it wasn't just law. And most of the protests were not part of something that was legally based. So it didn't have a lawsuit, or it didn't have something that I could really put my mind to make an argument just based on law alone. It involved people, regular people, just said one day when they saw the woman murdered or killed in Minneapolis, or or Minnesota, when they saw what was taking place on as far as anti-union, when they saw the rights of women being stripped away, something triggered in them and said, I'm going to do something, and I don't have a whole lot, but I have myself. I have my body. I have my mouth. I have my voice. I have my hand to write. I have my laptop. I have these basic tools, and with them, I can make a difference. And so it made me say to the woman and all those people, Fannie Lou Hamer and Daisy Bates and Tom Hayden and Frederick Douglass, all these people, all this time, it's like, what can I do to pay homage to them? And so that's why a part of me said, what's the best way to pay homage to them? It's not through just a legal argument. Yes, the law is there in the book. It has to be more. And so I was guided to make a book that had storytelling in it, so that an average person can read the book and feel it. Some part is speaking to them. And so I wanted to be almost like a novel in ways that it has storytelling and different stories in it, but fact-based, so that they can really use this as a stepping stone in their progress that they're making to be more enlightened about protests and feel more empowered to actually do something. And they don't have to take to the streets, but do something.
Thank you. And we're so happy because you're a Emmy Award-winning writer, right? So I think this is the first time we have an Emmy Award-winning writer joining us today. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, and where do you keep your Emmy Award?
Oh, you should have told me earlier. I would have had it right next to me. I'm very proud of my Emmy, because there are very few professors with an Emmy, for one, and and I actually got it for something that's very geeky. Thank you. And very geeky, which is Your Democracy. So for those people who don't know, I wrote and that what I gained the Emmy from being a writer on a project called Your Democracy. And Your Democracy is free, it's online. WHYY, which is an NPR PBS affiliate in Philadelphia, produced it, professionally produced animated series where you have 10 episodes on the Constitution. So if you need a refresher, or as I say, so many people come to this country, especially when you think about New York City, which is like 60 to 70% foreign born. So how would they know what's in the Constitution? You come here as an adult. Unless you take the citizenship test, which is now in jeopardy, unless you take the citizenship test, you're not going to know what's in the U.S. Constitution. So I just think that's important, because the other thing about James Madison, he wanted the U.S. Constitution to bind us. When I ask the question, what is an American? It's so different for each person. We're not just bound by, money or drive for success, or, language, or whatever it may be. We were supposed to be bound by the U.S. Constitution. That was the thing that was supposed to bind all of us. Yet we don't read the document. So I tried to think of ways in which we could take a greater interest in the Constitution. So I gained my Emmy by writing Your Democracy, and I hope that it will be helpful to people and empower them. Once again, it's about empowering people. And so they can watch it at their leisure. It's on YouTube as well as on WHYY's website.
So I know we're at the 1 minute mark, and if I could ask you a favor, we do have some questions that may take us over the 7 o'clock mark. Do you mind if I ask you some of the questions from the audience?
Oh,
Okay,
please do.
perfect. Thank you. So Leah had said, to touch on the previous comment, I view protests as mobilizing. However, change happens through organizing. Do you have thoughts on this perspective?
Change happens through organizing. What was that first
She
part?
says, however, change happens through organizing. Do you have thoughts on this perspective?
I truly believe change happens through organizing. I mean, I think about the diversity on this webinar right now. People have come to this country, whether or not they're here, first generation, second generation. As I noted, my family has been in this country since the 1700s, my family lines. So when you think about arriving in this country, it's based on an idea that there are certain constitutional, legal, societal, platforms that are rock solid. We're seeing now there are cracks in that platform, but how did they come to be? And Santa Claus did not create it. As I said before, employers didn't say, I'm going to give up some of my profits so that you can work fewer hours. That's not how it happened. People here fought for these things that made this the country you wanted to immigrate into. And that has to be understood. And that also means that you owe something. If you're an immigrant to this country, whether or not you're first generation or second generation, you owe something right now to keep the rights that attracted you to come here in the first place. And what I'm finding, there are too many people who just thought men just gave women rights. They thought white people just gave black people rights. They thought adults just gave children rights. That's not how it happened. Protesters said, we demand a certain level of living. And that's why we have a certain level of living. That's assumed, that continues. It's not to be assumed. It has to be fought for. And so, yes, social organizing means that people have to organize others. That also requires leadership. And we have a lot of people who are complaining, but people don't want to lead. I say complain and do. I'm not against complaining. I'll throw a complaint out there too, but complain and do, and realize that we all must put something in. Now, I'm realistic. Protesters are usually a fraction of the group affected. So not all women are going to protest, even though these issues are, issues that are, female oriented. Not all people who are gay are going to protest. Not all people who are Black are going to protest. Not all Native Americans are going to protest. That's not going to happen. But we have to have people who begin, and others will gain traction. And then, as I said before, the outside people from that group will also then buy in. But the idea that everybody's waiting for somebody else to do the work, and especially those people who didn't realize the underbelly of this nation, they never realized this ugly side of America that's always been there. But it's kept in check by protesters, whether or not it's by people filing lawsuits, people protesting in the streets, or other means of protest. That pushback is necessary. If not, then what you're seeing now is going to continue to grow until it is in your backyard.
Thank you. And Jackie has a question, I guess a comment. Jackie writes, I read about a proposed New York State Senate bill to teach the truth about the January 6th insurrection in public schools. Hard to believe we need a law to tell the truth. And they write, and read Project 2025 for self-defense.
Yes, Project 2020 is 1,000 pages, but there are summaries. And creativity is what we need as a part of protests as well. One of the things that Malcolm X said, I think is so important. You cannot tear down the master's house using the master's tools. People have educated themselves into believing that their education alone is enough to protect them. But it was creativity that gave us the Dahl test in Brown versus Board of Education. It's creativity that gave the protesters the different ways in which they can fight the systems that had more money than they had. That we rarely have had three branches of government on our side. It's always usually maybe one branch or none. So then how did we get what we have right now? They had to creatively think, how do I lobby? Whom do I lobby? What do I push? Who do I have to talk to in order to make my feelings known? How can I disrupt the system in a way that they will pay attention and stop doing what they're doing? And disruption is part of protest. And disruption doesn't necessarily mean violence, but disruption does mean taking the time to figure out what are the vulnerabilities of your opponent. So reading Project 2025, thinking creatively, actually studying your opponent as at least as much as they've studied us, because you can see all that they've done is based on people in a room studying all the different ways in which they can undermine Black progress, female progress, people who are gay, people who are homeless, people who are, they've looked at all these things. And then we're sitting back thinking at some point they'll come to their senses. That's not the way you win. And you can't win a protest by sitting home thinking somebody else is going to be the only one protesting. And then you look out and you see there aren't until it's in your backyard.
And then the very last question. Did you intentionally title the book parallel to Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States?
It's very closely aligned. My publisher actually had more to do with the title because this was not my initial title. This is more the title they wanted, and they published Howard Zinn. So they published other books, but I am a great admirer of Howard Zinn. And people have started using my title. So be careful for those people who are buying the book, because there are other books they decided to start using my title because my book has been successful. I also would ask you, and I just, two quick things, may I? To do two shameless plugs. One, if you buy the book on certain websites, I'm not going to put any out there, but certain websites, please leave a review because those are very important. The other is that if you are interested, I am very much traveling and doing speaking engagements. This past year, I went to 23 states, many, many more cities across the country. So I'm not going all over the place, but I am looking for people who want to have more discussions around protest. And please take care of yourself if you are going to a protest. As I said, don't go at night. If I actually look to see what time the sun is going to set. As I say in my book, my first protest was in 3rd grade. And so I would say, look to see when the sun is going to set and be out of there at least an hour before the sunset. Make sure that who's ever leading that protest you're familiar with. You have some background so you're not being led astray. Understand where you're going to be, tell people where you're going to be, have somebody stay home by the phone. If you're a lawyer, then be a lawyer for the protesters. Be the one who stays home so the protesters have someone to call if there is some issue that takes place. Keep a phone number of that lawyer on your skin. Write it on your forearm with a marker, because you will not have your phone just in case something happens or your battery dies. So there are ways in which you can protect yourself. And also, what's the goal of your protest? If you're going out, make sure you have a goal, a reason, and some idea of the group you're in. And everybody look out for everyone else. And if you see people infiltrating your protest, that's the time to leave.
Thinking, what's a good way for people to reach you if they want to?
Well, my website is Brown-Marshall, Brown with an E -Marshall with 2 L's, 23.com. So you can look for that. Also, I am very excited that not only have I worked on this book, but I also have short stories I write. I am a writer generally of across genre. I'm working on plays and screenplays. And I just want people to think creatively as well. So that's why I mention this, think creatively about how you can use wherever you are to help protest. Are we going to talk about book bans?
So I don't think we have time for talking about the book bans.
Well, I just then
You want to touch on it a little bit?
I'll just do this one little section that I have on the book on page 7.
Uh-huh.
Uprisings are protests that chart a jagged course over generations. For many groups in this country, their protests were riots. Their history was consistently taught inaccurately. Their achievements were disregarded, and their attributions went missing. When books are banned, now that the truth is finally being told, then reading to understand the complex myths and often violent past of this country is a strong act of protest. Reading is resistance against an educational system that often whitewashes the past and denies young people the truth. Freedom is not free, and each generation must sacrifice to make it theirs.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is such an awesome interview. Thank you so much, Gloria. And Casper, take it away. I think I'm so I'm like a groupie now. Like,
Yeah, it's been great
I'm
having you, and
fangirling.
hopefully we can still
It was
work
so
with you. Maybe
wonderful.
we could talk about the Martyr Day. So it was a pleasure having you
But
today. Hopefully we can have you back again one of these days. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody to join us on next week, January 15th from 6 to 7 p.m. as we interview Robert J. Copeland, author of The Joy of Solitude. So thank you again, Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall. It's been an honor having you with us tonight.
Well,
so
power
much.
to the people.
Thank you. And to
Thank
our
you.
audience,
you.
thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
That's it.
staying.
audience.
Thank
Happy
you for
New
staying
Year.
with us. This was one that we had to go over. So thank you so much, our audience, for staying with us. We really appreciate it.
And our audience is sending you thank yous.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
yous. Great job, my sister. Very educational and inspiring, Gloria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great job. Just want to let you know. And we want you to come to Queen's Library so
Of
much.
course.
Okay?
In person.
In person. That's right.
Yes,
That's
yes.
right.
Well, we remember we almost had a fight for her to see whose library she's gonna be coming into.
I think there is going to be a fight to have her.
Yes, yes.
Well, I
Yes.
thank you all, and it was my honor and my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so
You
much.
know, you have such
All
great
right.
ideas for programming. I mean, just the reading, just as you say, we all know about the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and so on. But who among us has actually read it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be something if we had, I don't know, it may have to take us 6 months to get through it, but because there's so much, and to actually understand what you read.
Yeah,
It's
that's
one
so
thing
true.
to read it, but to understand. So we may need you or some colleagues of yours to be on standby so that they
Yeah.
can say, this is what it means. Translation. This is the translation that you're reading.
Thanks.
You
Well,
know?
I have a nonprofit, the Law and Policy Group, and the Law and Policy Group, on it we sell our little pocket constitution. So,
Right.
yep. So that's the other thing. It's like, because it's not that large or long a document, but it's true. You do need to have some idea of what it means. And we have an annotation So you can look at footnotes and such and have an idea. But yeah, you do think it says one thing, but you have to be clear about the interpretation has been given by the Supreme Court.
Exactly,
Because you
exactly.
touched on
And
the
so
citizenship test, right?
we're gonna
And when we did it, I remember when I did it, I mean, you just had to kind of like remember the dates and time, but there is no, by the time it's over, it's over. It's just blank out of your mind, you know? And so I get what you're saying. Nobody really understand what is happening. You just give the answers and hope, fingers crossed, you get your citizenship, and then you
Right.
move on to the next, you know? So yes, that's so true.
Well,
Yeah.
definitely all of us will have to come together. I know you're going to be
Yes.
very busy, Professor.
Well, I
And
look
so,
forward to my film being shown. I know we talked about
I
that.
haven't forgotten. I haven't
Yes, that's
forgotten
the
that.
fight.
I haven't forgotten that. In fact, I'm looking into how we can get that film, okay? Because we don't have it in the library, so we want to be able to order that film. And of course, I'm going to let you know as soon as we have it in. And of course, the first person to respond to wanting to host the program, okay? I'm talking to my colleagues. Hint, hint. Okay. So
Well,
do know that
well,
I started looking for that last night. Definitely.
well, it's right now. It's still in competitions, in film festival competitions. So
Ah,
yes,
Oh,
yes.
okay,
okay.
okay. So we still can try to check it out and try to figure out how we can get a copy of it. You know, okay. And of course, we have to do public performance rights for the film as well. So, but
So
we'll be in
beautiful
touch.
people, we have to let the professor go.
Yes, yes.
At some point, we can keep her here planning our programs forever, which we will anyway. We'll contact her.
Thank
But
you so
maybe
much,
we want to wrap
Professor.
it up.
Okay.
Yes, we have
Thank
Have a
to.
good
you.
evening and thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you.
again.
Be blessed. Have a wonderful
Okay.
year. Okay.
You
Good
as
Okay.
night.
well. Thank you so
Good
Bye.
night.
much.
Okay, and thank
Bye-bye.
you, audience, for being with us. We're going to close down our program. Okay, we'll
Should we
wait till
end the
many of
event?
you have left.
Yes.